Well, welcome everyone to our event today, Visions of Change, University and Community in Partnership. This is a wonderful historic moment for all of us to reflect back on the history of Nashville and civil rights, and then moving forward into the future and how we go about building on the legacy of that period of time. And I am Dan Cornfield. I'm director of the Vanderbilt Center for Nashville Studies. The Vanderbilt Center for Nashville Studies is a little bit over a year old now. It's a research center at Vanderbilt that supports social, scientific, and historical research on greater Nashville as a community. And we are very pleased to be able to sponsor today's event. I'd like to recognize a few individuals today. Stephanie Pruitt in the back is the program coordinator of the Vanderbilt Center for Nashville Studies, program manager, and has brought us here together in this wonderful event. Next, I would like to introduce a very special friend of the center, perhaps much more than a friend of the center, who made the whole center possible. He's a civic-minded business person who's got a very compassionate heart of gold and a loyal alum of the university and loves Nashville, and whose family foundation also has supported and made possible the Center for Nashville Studies, Mr. Steve Turner. We have an illustrious community advisory board that is chaired by Steve Turner, and for those of you who are here today, I'd love for you to stand up so that we may recognize you. If you're on the Community Advisory Board of the Vanderbilt Center for Nashville Studies, there's Jose Gonzalez, Louis Levine, some others. We also have an illustrious Faculty Advisory Board. Several of you, I believe, are here as well. If you would like to stand up, we'd love to have you. Doug Perkins and Larry Isaac. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who will then introduce our keynote speaker. And he is an award-winning law professor. He is an outstanding provost who is building Vanderbilt and bringing in the finest faculty and nurturing the faculty as we go along, and breaking all boundaries when it comes to traditional forms of knowledge, and making truly the university a seamless intellectual community, and de-siloing the university, and is Vanderbilt's very own iChancellor, Mr. Nicholas S. Zeppos.
Thank you very much. It's just great to be here and see my colleagues and so many friends and wonderful people in the community. And let me try to set the stage but not go on too long here. Universities are often referred to, and I think quite derisively intended, as ivory towers. The ivory perhaps representing the sense of purity, and the tower obviously being a place of remove and distance and above from that which occurs below. In fact, there's a university in a major city, one of the world's greatest cities in our country, that has named one of its buildings almost as a rebuke to the community as the Ivory Tower. A university that really operates in that fashion, or is even perceived to operate in that fashion, to be aloof from the campus and the community, cannot thrive, and indeed, I think for those of us who have seen universities do that, really cannot survive. One could even say more, that a university that has separated itself from the community, that has said we operate within our boundaries with as little contact, building walls, intellectual as well as physical, has really lost its soul and has no true mission. For universities are really, as we always hope every day across our campus, are serving humanity. And that humanity is really beginning in the community in which that university is situated. So our goal is to make us part of the community And not just to say we as Vanderbilt can make the community better, but to realize that that's indivisible. We are the community, in the community, and making Vanderbilt better as well. Now, I think it's geography and location are often taken for granted. And at one time, our campus was really in the western part of the city in a relatively rural area. And in fact, there were gates that were put up to keep roaming cattle from coming on the campus. And so it gives you some sense of history and place, but then juxtapose it with our campus now, in the very same location, but really in a dynamic, exciting, changing, international community. And our growth, our struggles, our changes have been very, very much tied to Nashville. The CNS, I think, the Center for Nashville Studies, really represents the most noble of ventures for a university. And it is the simple but powerful one of recognizing our place in the community, of embracing us in the community, and seeing that the relationship between a university and a great city is a more powerful one, is a more humane one. And it is one where one can find common ground for discussion, exploration, and I think mutual betterment as we grow and thrive and face challenges together. But this idea doesn't grow on its own. I mean, sometimes good ideas are so simple, and as Dan pointed out, it has required leadership and support and listening and engagement from many different constituencies: faculty, staff, students, elected representatives, community leaders. And that has been a remarkable learning experience, and importantly, a listening experience back and forth. But as Dan mentioned, it also requires someone with the vision, the credibility, and the passion, someone who cares about Nashville and Vanderbilt in a way, and that really was Steve Turner, and we would not be here if it weren't for Steve's real love for community represented by Nashville and the Nashville community and the Vanderbilt community. I cannot thank Steve and his family foundation enough. Now, this partnership has been organic, evolving, just as communities do. It wasn't as if we just sat down and said, everybody knows each other, we all know what we're going to do here, let's make a to-do list. It really has been a kind of getting to know and getting to listen and getting to learn. And we have found, I think on both sides, a sense of commitment, a sense of energy, and a sense of excitement of what is possible in this really nascent venture. We've had projects, seminars that have gone forward, and common ground has been found, I think, quite quickly. This beautiful facility in which you are sitting and these new buildings are obviously part of a beautiful campus. But the philosophy, the belief behind this new community is that the students need to learn as much living in Nashville, outside of the classroom. And this isn't just a place where students live and learn. It is really a launching pad for them to live and learn outside of the classroom and in this great community we call Nashville. So we expect them to be educated, but we expect them to thrive and be educated in this place called Nashville, Tennessee. Now, as the CNS was coming out with many exciting ideas and things were popping up all over, it became clear that one of the most obvious, important, and perhaps difficult projects to take on was this incredible intersection of people and places during the civil rights movement in Nashville, Tennessee in the 1960s. The historic moment for Nashville, and I would say as a person who has been at Vanderbilt only 20 years, but has heard many times about the crises that engulfed our university at this very moment as well, when America and many things were changing and Vanderbilt was in the middle of this dynamic change. Now, many people participated in that, but at the center of this change, putting theory to practice, the theory of nonviolence to practice, was I will say, a young divinity student, school student by the name of James Lawson, who was a leader in that movement and was dismissed by the university for his role. Now, we have many obligations here, but two of the obligations we have are to history and to our mission and a sense of justice. And these would demand that as this new center goes forward, that Vanderbilt and Nashville sit down and reflect and study and take advantage of this moment in time to say, what were the roles of individuals? What were the decisions made? What were the risks taken? What was the role of various institutions? And to provide an historical account. For, as Mark Twain said, history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And we must learn from the past. So the possibilities were really incredible. But what was really incredible was the return of Jim and Dorothy Lawson to Nashville, Tennessee, as a distinguished professor at Vanderbilt. And Jim's writing and teaching and speaking on our campus and in the community have provided an opportunity for study and reflection that I think is relatively unparalleled in a community, and a community with a university as a partner. Others have stepped forward. Dennis Dickerson, I don't see Dennis here, but Dennis was inaugurated this year as our first James Lawson Professor of History. He is part of this exciting project with Dan, with, I see the Centennial Professor Larry Isaac there. And this project, the Nashville Civil Rights Project, I think, will serve our city and will serve our community, the community here, the community in Nashville, but also I think the community more broadly, the community in our country and internationally. For the issues that we faced then might be characterized differently today, but the power of ideas and the need to reflect on nonviolence as a social movement can never go away. So I close by a story I heard. It's a story that's kind of a sad story because about 6 months ago, David Halberstam came on our campus. And we were able to share David's company over a number of days. He had been back to campus and other times and spoke with Jim and participated on some panels. I know some of you were there to hear David speak. He died shortly thereafter. But I was really, and I've read many of his wonderful books, but the thing that I was struck by was at the close of his talk, he said, I'm always asked, who's the most impressive person I've ever met or interviewed? And he has said, I have sat down with generals, presidents, emperors. I have been fortunate to sit with people who would be counted as some of the greatest people in history. And the most awe-inspiring and impressive person I've ever met is James Lawson. So I give you Jim Lawson.
Well, I'm delighted to be a part of this gathering this afternoon, not only to celebrate the Vanderbilt Center for Nashville Studies, but in some ways perhaps to think about the way in which cities such as Nashville and a university like Vanderbilt can work creatively to make in the 21st century a city and an urban area that blossoms with human affections, to quote John Wesley, but with the ways in which in an urban community human life can be celebrated and can be explored, and indeed in which all human life can be acknowledged and be included in the process of making an area truly great. Because I suspect that if there is anything that has hurt our country across the years, it's been the exclusionary structures that have for too long been taken for granted. I'm delighted to be again at Vanderbilt and in Nashville because this is a wonderful city. I had no idea that I would connect up with Nashville as a young person, or as a student, or as a coach in Nagpur, India at Hislop College in the early 50s. But it did happen, and I am persuaded that it was providential, that it represented indeed a view of history, and if you might tolerate my assertion, that it represented the coming together of God's purpose for my own life and for that time Nashville. I did not plan to be here, but I launched a personal project in the direction of trying to see how I could face the racism and the prejudice that I met around the age of 4 in the streets of Massillon, Ohio, where therefore I grew up for the next 23, 25 years. My father was an AME Zion pastor at the time, an African Methodist Episcopal Zion pastor, and at the age of 4 he was appointed to St. James AME Zion Church in Massillon, Ohio. It is there on Tremont Street that I remember first experiencing personally insults and slurs that challenged my family's life, my parents, and their purview of who I was and who they hoped for me to be. And where, for me, the struggle began, though I did not explain it in that fashion then. How do you develop a sense of your own humanity and your own personhood, a sense that your life was meant to be, that your life was invaluable in the midst of a society that was saying many things and doing many things that were exactly the opposite, that would contort you into something other than being a boy and being alive and being human. And that process is what made me come to recognize the possibility that I could go the route of eye for an eye, retaliation, fear, the rest of it, or I could go the route of using the love that was at the center of my own family's life and was at the center of the way in which I was birthed and the center of the way in which I was raised in those early years especially. I could go that route. I could cling to that kind of sensibility rather than abandon it. And it is my determination to cling to that sensibility, to that compassion, to that understanding that all of us, though this is not the way I put it then by any means, we were all in the same boat. We were all created by a source beyond ourselves, and that we had to somehow work it out in a way by which we could do it. We could live together, we could work together, and we could make our world something quite different. I discovered that what I was doing then was nonviolence. I didn't discover that until 1947 as a freshman in college. I had read the name of Gandhi, but I had not made the connections in my own struggle, which by 1947 had gone on for about almost 10 years. In any case, I knew almost instantly as I read Gandhi that what Gandhi experimented with for 50 years of his life, what Gandhi called nonviolence, was precisely what I was working to discover. And so I learned from him not only the power of nonviolence, but I also learned then that it has deep roots in the things that we human beings across the century have said about ourselves, and that it had power that had been untapped. Not only untapped power, but a secret that history had not unraveled or uncovered. So that was the beginning of my own exploration and discovery of what and how change, personal and social and environmental, could take place in ways that were creative and transforming. and that could lift vision and ideas before me and before others. But that still isn't how I came to Nashville, because my detours were across. My detours were rather serious. By age 21, about ready to graduate from college, in my resistance to the draft, my refusal to participate in any form of violence, and therefore would not make a change for any reason, from the inside of my life, I spent 13 months in federal prison, and so missed my graduation ceremony in 1951, but then was able to continue to pick up the notion of going overseas to work under the employment or auspices of the Methodist Church, of which I was a part and for which I was preparing for ministry. In fact, I had already been ordained a deacon, where for 3 years I was able to coach and walk in the shoes of Gandhi around India and do further study and read some of the sources that were in India that were not in the United States. I was excited by around December the 6th or 7th of 1955 with the explosion of the Montgomery bus boycott. Exhilarated because that was something that I thought could happen in the United States while in college and while studying Gandhi and looking at social movements around the world. And I knew that that was a great historic opening that I at least had been looking for. I did not shake Dr. King's hand until around February the 6th, 1957, when he spoke at Oberlin College, when I had returned to the United States and returned to graduate studies in theology there. I know that date because of David Halberstam, because he put research to it and unpacked it and told me about it some years ago. I didn't remember the date. I knew the year, 57. But in any case, Martin King and I were able to visit quietly and together for a while and for the first time. And we had many different connections, but in the process of that first conversation, face-to-face, I said that one day, probably when I finished some of my own graduate goals, that I would probably move south and work and join the effort that he had already launched. And he looked at me and said very, very quietly, "Don't wait. Come now," and some other things about that time. And I heard myself responding, also very, very quietly, "I'll come as soon as I can." And so that's where I made the decision and confirmed it as I continued to remain at Oberlin, that I would drop out of graduate school and move south at the earliest possible moment. I still hadn't considered Nashville as the city. And I almost, as the decision got firmed up in the summer and the fall, almost moved to Atlanta, and was my first choice to go to Atlanta. But then some of my friends and I began to talk about all of this. They were not trying to convince me not to drop out. But as we talked, they suggested Nashville. And I know that to again been a providential decision. What we were able to do in Nashville could never have been done in Atlanta. I did not know that for another 10 years, but I learned in time that Nashville had the combination of people and structures and the rest of it that could allow a movement to effectively impact the city, and indeed, as a consequence of that, impact the nation. Well, my work in moving to Nashville was to travel the South for the Fellowship of Reconciliation, teaching and counseling and matters of nonviolence. That was my premier work. So that meant that I visited Little Rock, Arkansas, Montgomery, Alabama, Birmingham, Jackson, Memphis, Tennessee, Charlottesville, Virginia, Greensboro, North Carolina. I did speaking and counseling, and did workshops on the struggle and how nonviolence could teach us a great deal about it. I worked immediately with Dr. King in doing workshops on nonviolence for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and counseling people. But the big question in the years of 58, 59, 60, the big question was this: was Montgomery an accident? Can it happen again? And being an advocate of nonviolent practice and theory and direct action, the question to myself was, where can it begin again? Where can we demonstrate the great potential for a struggle that could be, if I can use this word, redemptive, that could make changes and could allow a place to move into another level of life and understanding? That was a question that Kelly Miller Smith asked, incidentally, in those years. And as we talked here in Nashville, we decided that we were going to follow a process to start in Nashville and do something here. And that, in a very brief word, was why Nashville developed a movement that lasted essentially as a nonviolent movement for probably 7, 8, 9, 10 years. A part of the meaning of this center is that we're going to explore and look at, and we are researching and taking oral history so that we can do not only the years 58 to 62, the first 4 years that I was here in the city, but beyond that. Charles Parker here has reminded me that in 62 he was a part of the struggle to open up the old campus grill, which I never went into in 58 or 59 or 60 or 61 or 62. But so it was an important struggle, an important matter. The Nashville movement, you may or may not know this, the Nashville movement fundamentally reinvented the civil rights movement in 1960, 59 and 60. Those are not my words. Those are the words of Will Campbell in this city. There was also the sense that Martin King had, because with the recruitment and the training that we did in 58, 59 here, and with the quality of clergy and people from the community, including women as well as clergy, and then the students we were able to recruit, we were able to plan and scheme and chart a movement that showed and revealed in ways perhaps never before in the United States the efficacy of a nonviolent struggle. Its dynamic, its power, its creativity, the possibility of dramatizing issues in a fashion that will allow people to take a look and see it and rethink it for themselves about who we were as a people here in this city. It reinvented the civil rights movement. Martin King called it the model movement up to that time. It became the model for Memphis and for Dallas, Texas. It became the model for Albany, Georgia. It became the model that King and others, including myself, worked for when we began to plan around the Birmingham campaign in 1963. It became the model because it tried to be deeply rooted in nonviolent theory and practice. It became the model because I insisted that nonviolent struggle is more efficacious than violent struggle. It requires, however, training and discipline. It's not spontaneous or haphazard. I insisted then and insist now that nonviolence required people who try to be spiritually and morally, verbally, physically fit, and energetic and ready to take risks that would demand the best that we can be or the best that we are. So the movement produced a leadership that for the rest of the decade offered struggle and movement in place after place across especially the southeastern section of our country. And I don't want you to get the impression now that then or now I thought the southeastern part of the country was separated from the Midwest where I grew up, because I met racism and exclusion not in Nashville but in Ohio and Michigan and Indiana and Illinois. Those are the places where I weaned my awareness of what prejudice and racism can be about, and where I sought to figure out how you best really creatively intervene and try to make a difference in that spirituality. So it was not a Southern problem. It was then a national problem, and it remains a national problem. But the Nashville model provided some ideas and creativity and people who could demonstrate for the next generation, in fact, that we have in nonviolent social theory an untapped power that if we would learn about it and theorize with it, we would be astonished at the possibilities. So Nashville became for me a home away from Ohio, a home away from home. And I have ever since then appreciated the varied ways of Nashville as a city and as a people. And Vanderbilt was the right place for me to have re-enrolled in the fall of 1958. And the Divinity School was at a place that I did not know at that time, but in terms of the people and the faculty, they were all, any number of them were names that I read about, names that I knew about before I became acquainted and made the decision to go ahead and re-enter the school, re-enter theological studies. The university was not at the place where it's at now, but it was for me a great 2 years experience where the chances to study and learn and to be engaged in conversation and to learn the meaning of research, to tackle the issues that I wanted to face as a clergy person, as a pastor, where those tools could be honed and perfected in a variety of ways. Well, all of that is to say this now finally, that this center has the opportunity of doing the kind of research on a variety of issues, but beginning with the civil rights movement. It would be wonderful if Nashville could embrace the movements of the 50s and 60s that took place in this city, that pulled down the signs, eliminated some of the shame of being human and moving about this city, and created at least a nucleus of people who recognized that we were reconciled to one another, and that we would not continue to exercise the injustice and the cruelties that were so much a part of the past that we, on the one hand, have mythologized, and on the other hand, have denied. One of the things that attracted my family to pick up a new and fresh relationship with Vanderbilt University in 2005, 2006 was this, that it was clear that the university was seeing itself as a national university and a world-class university, that there were all sorts of exciting intersections of ideas around departments and faculty people, that the Chancellor's office and the Provost's office were committed to the notion that the university's task is not just to be a degree factory and to churn out people who get through one way or the other, but had an idea that it had to help create the leaders of the 21st century who 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 10 years from now will be the people who head the major institutions of this nation, whether economic or religious or political or social or artistic or educational. What is the task of the university in taking young people and preparing them for work in the future? Is more than a monetary affair, no matter what Wall Street teaches. It is more than an American empire mythology that can only, in the long run, destroy the magnificent vision of the beginning of this nation in 1776. It is more than a matter of wealth gathering or power gathering. In the 21st century, can we in this nation really dismantle racism and sexism and violence and greed? No longer have these four social forces shape and misshape and contort our land. The adventures called Iraq, or the adventures called Guatemala, or the emerging adventure called Venezuela or Colombia, or the adventure of building our military bases down the eastern coast of Africa, as major way of managing and maintaining resources that we want out of that continent. Can we create a new breed of life for ourselves that will have a different kind of vision, a vision of justice, a vision of beauty, a vision of hope, a vision where every boy and girl and every man and woman will have access to what in my tradition, in the black tradition, the black church tradition, and the black wisdom tradition used to be called the tree of life, to have access to the tree of life with all of its marvelous possibilities. The Center for Nashville Studies, with this first examination of the civil rights movement of Nashville, we hope that we can produce some documents that will help to spread the meaning of the movement of those decades of the 50s and the 60s, and it will help both the university and the community take a great deal of pride in being a different city in 2007, but at the same time recognize, both to our shame, but to our new commitment, that we've come a long distance, but the journey ahead is even longer, but it's a journey that we can make if we commit ourselves to the best of the past at the same time as we expect to make today and the future better still.
Thank you, Reverend, for a most inspiring speech. You're a tough act to follow. And I know, like all of us, we were quite humbled in your presence and by your remarks.